The mystery of Curly Howard is finally solved, and it isn't good. Generations have howled with laughter at the antics of the most beloved member of the Three Stooges, Curly Howard. His childlike innocence, perfect physical comedy, and signature knock nuke became iconic parts of American entertainment. Still, behind that masterful comic performance lurked a tragic reality to which Columbia Pictures worked day and night to keep the public in the dark. Today, we'll be exposing the heartbreaking truth about Curly Howard's life and career facts that fundamentally alter how we think about those classic comedies that have delighted us for decades. From hidden health crises to studio exploitation, from undiagnosed mental illness to alcoholism, which would contribute to his demise, Curly's real story bears little resemblance to the carefree clown he portrayed on screen. Most disturbing is how his suffering was hidden from the very fans who adored him, creating a false narrative that persists to this day. What you are about to learn will forever change the way you watch those classic Stooges shorts, revealing for the first time the painful reality behind some of comedy's most famous routines and the cruel exploitation of a man who gave everything to make America laugh. The disparity between Curly Howard's public image and private reality ranks as one of Hollywood's most successful deceptions. While audiences were seeing what appeared to be an indestructible comedian performing astonishing physical feats with boundless energy, the man behind the character was deteriorating both physically and mentally at a shocking pace. Columbia Pictures took advantage of the immense popularity and profit that Curly could bring in, creating an elaborate facade to hide his declining health and personal struggles from brutal working conditions that further accelerated his collapse. We should, by all means, undertake to examine 5 crucial aspects of Curly's hidden story, so that finally, we may understand the true tragedy of this comedy legend, a man who brightened millions of lives, while he silently suffered in ways his fans never suspected. One of the most devastating truths is that his health collapsed far earlier than fans realize. When most people think of Curly Howard's health problems, they focus on the 1946 stroke that effectively ended his career with the Three Stooges. But the truth is that Curly's physical decline began far sooner, a deterioration which Columbia Pictures deliberately kept hidden from the public, while continuing to push him through an increasingly grueling production schedule. By the mid-1930s, when Curly was just in his early 30s, he was already suffering from serious health problems that would have sidelined most performers. He developed dangerously high blood pressure, struggled with fluctuating obesity due to various crash diets he tried, and he also suffered from chronic fatigue, which made even the most basic movements difficult between takes. These weren't minor ailments, but serious medical conditions requiring treatment and rest, neither of which Curly got in sufficient measure. The physical decline became increasingly visible to those working with him, though careful camera work and editing kept it largely hidden from audiences. Crew members from this period recall Curly sweating profusely under the hot lights, sometimes nearly collapsing after particularly demanding physical routines. His signature rapid-fire delivery began to show occasional slurring, and the boundless energy that had characterized his early performances required more and more recovery time between shots. Most troubling was the studio's response to these obvious warning signs. Rather than adjusting production schedules or modifying routines to accommodate Curly's declining health, Columbia Pictures maintained its punishing pace of 8 Stooges shorts per year, a production schedule that required nearly continuous filming with minimal breaks. When Curly struggled to complete scenes, production would simply pause until he could continue, rather than addressing the underlying health issues causing these difficulties. The man who did backflips on screen could barely walk between takes, revealed one camera operator who worked on numerous Stooges shorts during this period. By the early 1940s, Curly's decline had accelerated dramatically. When one watches Stooges shorts in chronological order, changes in his performance are subtle but quite unmistakable. Slightly less fluidity in his movements, reaction times a beat or so slower, and an occasional slight thickening of his voice. As insurance, directors started cutting around his limitations, using more reaction shots of Moe and Larry and structuring routines to require less sustained physical activity from Curly. What makes this extended decline particularly tragic is that it occurred during the period when the Three Stooges were at the height of their popularity, producing some of their most beloved shorts. Classics like A Plumbing We Will Go, 1940, and Microphonies, 1945, were created while Curly was already experiencing significant health problems. His brilliant performances, delivered despite physical suffering, remained invisible to adoring audiences. The studio's willingness to extract performances from an obviously ailing performer constitutes a particularly disturbing form of exploitation. Columbia Pictures, under the notorious leadership of Harry Cohn, treated the Stooges as machines designed to generate profit rather than artists entitled to even the most basic care and consideration. As long as Curly could perform adequately in front of the camera, even if he collapsed the moment the director called cut, the studio had no reason to intervene, much less provide the medical attention he so obviously needed. This pattern of negligence directly contributed to the stroke that would ultimately end Curly's career, creating a situation in which physical collapse was not just possible, but inevitable. Were the studio to have responded appropriately to his early health warnings, Curly might have enjoyed a much longer career and life, a fact which transforms our understanding of the Stooges' classic period from innocuous entertainment to a document of exploitation masquerading in plain sight. 2. The stroke that ended Curly Howard's career happened in his 40s. The official narrative of his departure from the Three Stooges, to the extent that Columbia Pictures acknowledged it at all, suggested a performer who simply stepped away after a long career to be replaced seamlessly by his brother Shemp Howard. In actuality, Curly's career was brought to an end when he suffered a massive stroke in May 1946, aged only 42 years. The circumstances of this career-ending event reveal much about how Columbia Pictures viewed the Stooges in general and Curly in particular. The stroke occurred during the filming of Half-Wits Holiday. Though Curly had been showing increasingly alarming symptoms throughout the production, on the fatal day he was resting on set between scenes when cast members noticed that his speech had become severely slurred and one side of his face appeared to droop. Despite these classic stroke symptoms, there was no immediate medical response. Instead, director Jules White simply worked around Curly for the remainder of the day, completing scenes that didn't require his presence. This incident marked the end of Curly's active career. In keeping with studio practices, no public announcement was made about his condition or departure. Columbia simply brought in Shemp Howard as his replacement and continued production without missing a beat. For audiences in 1947, Curly simply disappeared without explanation, replaced by a different Stooge with no acknowledgement of the change or its cause. The most beloved Stooge vanished, and nobody told the audience why, observed one film historian who has studied the Stooges' career extensively. This silence reflected Columbia's approach to talent management, treating performers as interchangeable parts rather than individuals whose health might concern their fans. The studio's handling of Curly's stroke exemplifies the callousness of the system. While Curly lay in a hospital, beginning what would be a difficult recovery, Columbia executives were already planning how to continue the profitable Stooges series with minimal disruption to their production schedule. There was no retirement ceremony, no public thanks for his years of service, not even a press release acknowledging his departure or explaining Shemp's sudden appearance. For Curly himself, the stroke represented not just the end of his career, but the beginning of a devastating physical decline that would continue for the remaining 6 years of his life. The initial stroke left him partially paralyzed on his left side and affected his speech, devastating impairments for a physical comedian whose livelihood depended on precise movement and verbal timing. Despite some limited recovery in the months following the stroke, Curly would never return to the Stooges as a regular performer. He made just one brief cameo appearance in the 1947 short Hold That Lion, a bittersweet moment which showed how much his health had deteriorated. In this brief scene, a partially bald Curly, sans shaved head, pops up as a sleeping train passenger. Though the moment delighted fans who recognized him, it is painful to watch with the knowledge of his condition. His face was noticeably affected by the stroke, and his trademark energy had been reduced to a shadow of his former performances. That Curly stroke came when he was just 42 years old, speaks volumes about the toll his Stooges career had taken upon his health. This wasn't an elderly performer reaching the natural end of his working life, but a middle-aged man whose body had been pushed beyond its limits by years of punishing physical comedy performed under increasingly difficult conditions. 3. Curly may have had undiagnosed mental illness. While his physical health problems have received some acknowledgement over the years, far less attention has been paid to his psychological struggles, issues that may have constituted undiagnosed mental illness affecting him throughout his adult life. According to family members, close friends, and biographers who have studied his personal papers and interviewed those who knew him, Curly displayed patterns of behavior consistent with conditions like bipolar disorder or severe depression. Those who worked closely with him described dramatic mood swings that seemed disconnected from external circumstances. He would sometimes arrive at the studio bubbling with manic energy, talking rapidly, initiating pranks, and displaying the childlike enthusiasm that translated so effectively to the screen. Other days, he would appear deeply depressed, withdrawn, uncommunicative, and displaying a profound sadness that confused colleagues accustomed to his more animated personality. The laugh was real. So was the pain behind it, noted one family member who witnessed these mood fluctuations firsthand. This observation captures the duality that characterized Curly's emotional life. The genuine joy he could express existed alongside equally genuine periods of psychological suffering. These struggles intersected painfully with his professional obligations. The demanding production schedule of the Three Stooges shorts required consistent performance, regardless of his mental state. Thus, when Curly was experiencing depressive episodes, he would still be expected to portray the manic, energetic character audiences loved, a psychological strain likely to exacerbate his underlying condition. Mo Howard later acknowledged in private conversations that maintaining Curly's on-screen persona often entailed considerable effort whenever his brother was going through dark periods. According to several accounts, Mo would sometimes need to actively coach Curly through scenes in these episodes, giving extra cues and encouragement to keep him up to the expected energy level. The studio's approach to these psychological challenges was predictably focused on productivity rather than well-being. Columbia Pictures had no infrastructure for addressing mental health issues among performers. No studio psychologists, no wellness programs, not even basic acknowledgement that psychological struggles might require accommodation or treatment. So long as Curly could perform when the cameras rolled, his emotional state was considered irrelevant. This neglect was further compounded by the general stigma on mental health in the 1930s and 1940s. Even if Curly or his family sought professional help, psychiatric treatments were often ineffective or even harmful by modern standards. The limited understanding of conditions like bipolar disorder meant that even a formal diagnosis might not have led to meaningful improvement. Instead, Curly increasingly turned to alcohol as self-medication, a common but destructive coping mechanism that temporarily blunted his psychological pain while ultimately hastening his physical decline. Without appropriate diagnosis or treatment, he was left to manage profound mood disturbances while keeping the punishing work schedule his contract demanded. The possibility that Curly suffered from undiagnosed mental illness adds another layer of tragedy to his story, suggesting his suffering extended beyond the physical realm into psychological territory he and those around him were ill-equipped to properly address. It also recasts one's understanding of his comedic performance, framing the boundless joy he projected on screen as having often overcome significant internal barriers unseen by his adoring audience. For Curly Howard's alcoholism was hidden from the public. His worst-kept secret was his increasingly serious dependence on alcohol. What started as social drinking on occasion developed into a destructive pattern, affecting his health and performances. This addiction, which the studio worked hard to keep under wraps, had much to do with his physical decline and probably contributed to the stroke that finished his career. Curly's relationship with alcohol substantially worsened in the late 1930s, which coincided not only with the rising physical demands of his work with the Stooges, but also with possible undiagnosed mental health issues. Social drinking after shoots or on weekends developed into regular consumption, sometimes even before or during filming days, alarming his brother Mo and other colleagues. They let him drink himself to death as long as the reels kept turning, observed one crew member who worked regularly on Stooges productions during this period. This blunt assessment captures the studio's approach to Curly's growing addiction, acknowledged privately, but never officially addressed as long as he could still perform. The most troubling aspect of Curly's alcoholism was how directly it intersected with filming. Crew members and fellow performers remember instances where he would show up to the set quite drunk, particularly in the years closest to his stroke. Rather than delay production or seek to treat the root cause, the team simply worked around him, rewriting scenes sometimes to require less dialogue or precision from Curly, other times leaning on Moe and Larry to cover for his impaired performance. Moe, as brother and de facto Stooges leader, was in the hard spot of enabling and managing the addiction problem of Curly. He would often position Curly physically for certain shots, holding him briefly in place before stepping into his own position when Curly could not hit his marks consistently. These interventions allowed filming to continue, but did nothing to address the serious health problem unfolding before everyone's eyes. Columbia Pictures' attitude toward Curly's alcoholism is paradigmatic of the exploitative studio system of the era. Instead of recognizing his addiction as a health crisis deserving of intervention, executives responded by perceiving it as a threat to production schedules and profitability. Their response was not to offer support or treatment, but to seek strategies that allowed their filming to continue regardless of his condition. The publicity department further bolstered this illusion by reworking Curly's public persona into that of a happy-go-lucky comedian whose slapstick antics on-screen mirrored his natural personality. Any hint of his struggles with alcohol was to be systematically excluded from press materials, interviews, and public appearances. When his drinking led to missed appearances or minor public incidents, alternative explanations were quickly circulated, usually citing illness or scheduling conflicts. The results of such untreated alcoholism were as predictable as they were tragic. Alcohol further elevated Curly's already high blood pressure and contributed to fluctuating weight, each factor feeding into a vicious cycle of deteriorating physical health. More to the point, the effects of alcohol on the cardiovascular system likely increased his stroke risk, making his 1946 cerebrovascular accident at least partially an act of this unaddressed addiction. But perhaps one of the more troubling aspects of Curly's story is how the studio extracted performances from an increasingly alcohol-dependent performer, seemingly without any meaningful intervention. It colors our interpretation of those classic Stooges shorts, placing the audience in an uncomfortable position of knowing that some of comedy's most beloved routines were performed by a man struggling with addiction, surrounded by a system that valued his output over his welfare. 5. Curly's final years were a tragedy that few discuss. The public narrative typically ends with his departure from the Three Stooges in 1946, with the implication that he retired quietly and lived out his days in peace until his death in 1952. In actuality, however, it is bleaker a period of tremendous suffering, institutional neglect, and gradual decline that contrasts so starkly with his vibrant screen persona. After his first stroke, Curly had struggled through a painful recovery process, rendered all the more tortuous by his various health problems and the limited medical options at the time. He regained some function but never fully recovered, remaining partially paralyzed on his left side and experiencing ongoing speech difficulties, features devastatingly impairing to a man whose identity and livelihood were built around physical comedy and verbal timing. Rather than standing by him through this time, Columbia Pictures essentially washed their hands of Curly once it became clear that he could no longer perform. The studio that had gained so much from his talent provided minimal support for his ongoing medical expenses, forcing him to rely primarily on family assistance and dwindling savings. This financial strain was furthered by the difficulty that Curly faced in accepting his limitations. According to accounts from the family, he initially believed he would recover fully and return to performing, a hope that gradually faded as his condition failed to improve, contributing to periods of deep depression further affecting health. In 1947, Curly married for the third time to Valerie Newman. This relationship offered some stability during his early recovery, but as his health declined, the marriage came under increasing strain. Valerie found herself in the role of full-time caregiver rather than spouse, creating significant tension. Curly's deterioration accelerated in July 1948 when he suffered a second major stroke, causing more severe damage than the first had. For the remaining 4 years of his life, he cycled between hospitals and nursing facilities, a stark contrast to the fame and activity he had once enjoyed. He gave them everything. They left him with nothing, observed a nursing home attendant who cared for him during this period. This period of his life was marked by the decline of both physical and cognitive abilities. For a man whose comedic timing had once made millions laugh, this loss was especially cruel. Mo visited often, usually bringing money along, and described the emotional pain of seeing his vivacious little brother turn into a shadow of his former self. According to members of his family, Curly often failed to recognize Mo when he came to visit, a heart-wrenching sign of his cognitive breakdown. The final blow came in December of 1951, when Curly suffered a massive cerebral hemorrhage that totally incapacitated him. He was transferred to the North Hollywood Hospital and Sanitarium, where he remained bedridden and largely unresponsive until his death in January 1952 at just 48 years old. It is a tragic ending that the official narrative of the Three Stooges has by and large sanitized. Continuing to profit from Stooges shorts during Curly's decline, Columbia Pictures released only a brief statement upon his death, omitting any mention of his condition or the studio's role in his deterioration. To date, this sanitized version has persisted, allowing fans to easily enjoy the shorts without confronting the disturbing reality behind the man who brought Curly to life. If we consider all 5 parts of Curly Howard's secret story, it paints a very disturbing picture. He wasn't just a comedian with health issues. He was a sensitive soul taken advantage of by a studio not caring about human life as much as it cared about dollars and cents. All these things, the years of punishing physical comedy, mental health struggles unaddressed, alcoholism enabled, a stroke that ended his career, tragic final years reveal a pattern of neglect and exploitation